Hello, my name's Amanda Super. I'm an occupational psychologist. I've been working in and alongside organisations for 25 years in staff and leadership development. I specialise in self-compassion development in the workplace as a practitioner, and I completed a professional doctorate in this subject area in 2019. I'm going to use this opportunity, thank you very much for inviting me, Birkbeck Connections, to introduce you to this approach and how it can assist us in our lives and work. I'm also going to outline the research in this area that I conducted during my professional doctorate and both the systematic literature review and an empirical study as well. I'll conclude this session with an application that I provide in practice with a range of organisations to support their staff health and wellbeing strategy. I thought it might be helpful to just outline to you how I came to this subject area. My self-compassion journey started around 10 years ago. I was successfully running my own occupational psychology consultancy in Manchester, where I'm based, and I fell seriously ill. And whilst recovering from various surgeries, I started to read about the research of Dr. Kristen Neff. She's an American researcher, and she devised a valid and reliable measure of self-compassion in 2003. And I was also reading her book and other associated work. I started to apply the principles of the self-compassion approach to my own recovery, and I know that it helped me bounce back more quickly and fully than I might have done otherwise. When I did eventually go back to work after 8 months off sick, I started to integrate the self-compassion approach into all staff and leadership development work that I was doing, and my clients were calling it life-changing. So this is now the only approach that I deliver into workplaces for employees at all levels to promote their well-being. So what do we mean by compassion? Well, it literally means to suffer with, to recognise that suffering with a desire to alleviate it. And as Paul Gilbert describes it, as being helpful and not harmful to both self and others. Self-compassion, in Neff's definition, is compassion turned inward when faced with difficulty, to treat ourselves as we would a good friend. And it has three core components, this approach. The first core component is mindfulness, recognizing what we're thinking and feeling in the present moment rather than without judgment, rather than overreacting. Self-kindness, being supportive and understanding towards ourselves when we're having a difficult time, rather than being harshly self-critical. And common humanity, remembering that everyone makes mistakes and experiences difficulties at times. We are not alone. And there's a growing body of literature behind this approach, and research does show that people who are more self-compassionate are happier, because practicing self-compassion leads to greater levels of happiness, optimism, gratitude, and better relationships with others. They're less stressed, because self-compassion is a powerful antidote to self-criticism and perfectionistic thinking that can lead to stress, anxiety, and depression. And they're more resilient. Self-compassionate people bounce back more easily from setbacks and are more likely to learn from their mistakes. International peer-reviewed evidence shows that self-compassion is associated with greater levels of resilience, emotional intelligence, as I've already mentioned, happiness, optimism, also life satisfaction, gratitude, compassion for others, and pro-social behaviour, and reduced stress, depression, anxiety, fear of failure, burnout, and compassion fatigue. In fact, self-compassion is a protective factor in a wide range of well-being indicators, particularly mental health. And training staff to develop self-compassion has been shown to lead to greater self-care and emotional resilience. Now, one thing we do know is our working lives are increasingly complex, challenging, and stressful. 1 in 6 of us will experience a common mental health disorder each and every week. And 7.6% of sickness absence can be attributed to stress, depression, and anxiety annually in the UK. And there are 14.3 million working days lost per year. And it is an organisation's responsibility to manage work-related stress in situ. The growing evidence base suggests that self-compassion is important to health and well-being in non-clinical samples, particularly in relation to psychological health, and that self-compassion is a robust predictor of stress outcomes, and that burnout is mediated by self-compassion. Now, self-compassion is a dynamic skill or a mindset that can be developed. And in Kirby's meta-analysis in 2017, he showed that compassion-focused interventions are showing potential benefits on a range of outcomes, and that was across a variety of populations. And then Ferrari's meta-analysis in 2019 showed that self-compassion interventions, she only looked at randomized control trials, showed efficacy of interventions on a range of outcomes, again, in various populations. To date, there have been no comparative studies for developing self-compassion in working populations published, but I do have, along with Joe Yarker and Rachel Lewis, a systematic literature review under review at the current time. So I just wanted to introduce you to the systematic literature review that I conducted, where I explored the evidence for the development of self-compassion in the workplace, because we know that the trait of self-compassion may have its roots in our formative experiences. However, the evidence suggests that it can be learnt, and randomized control trials show that it's a teachable skill in a variety of populations. And I was interested in how workplace well-being might be promoted by training employees to be self-compassionate. So I considered the literature in all sectors for self-compassion development interventions in the workplace, which interventions had been used, and I looked to evaluate their impact and outcomes for employees. So my primary objective was to ascertain whether there is evidence to support the suggestion that self-compassion focused interventions can lead to benefits relevant to a working population, and also what interventions have been used and what the outcomes have been. So I ran a literature search and identified 591 papers in total, and after various sifting procedures, I ended up with a final number of papers selected for inclusion of 12. The main aspects of the synthesis I conducted for those 12 papers resulted in the following information. So a range of sectors were covered, but they were mainly healthcare related. Countries across the world where the research had taken place were covered, and there were a variety of design methodologies in those 12 papers. 3 were randomized control trials, 3 were non-randomized control trials, and 6 were trials. And a variety of outcome measures were used: the self-compassion scale and the self-compassion scale short form, which is NEF's valid and reliable measure of self-compassion, but also other outcome measures were considered as well: burnout, stress, depression, anxiety, satisfaction and quality of life, resilience, and mindfulness. And in terms of the interventions themselves, they ranged in duration from 2.5 days to 16 weeks. They had a variety of delivery formats. There were 10 group-based face-to-face studies, 1 group-based over the phone, and 1 individual face-to-face programme. And they used a variety of content to inform them. So there were 6 based on mindfulness-based stress reduction. There were 2 based on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. There were 2 based on compassion-focused therapy. There was one based on an approach called mindfulness with meta, and there was one using an approach called compassion cultivation training. 9 of the 12 studies had mainly mindfulness in its focus. And one of the things that we can ascertain already is that more research is required on solely self-compassion focused interventions. The key outcomes from the systematic literature review in relation to self-compassion development were that self-compassion, regardless of how it was measured, the outcomes in that improved across time, with effect sizes ranging from large to small stroke moderate. The majority were large, were reported. And 60% of mental health, subjective wellbeing and psychosocial measures showed significant improvement as a result of the interventions. So there's some promising evidence to support the development of self-compassion in the workplace. But the systematic literature review showed evidence to be fairly limited in terms of range, and it lacks sufficient clarity in terms of the effectiveness of the interventions in relation to content delivery and assessment. So future research really does need to focus on comparative research on method, delivery and content, and suggested future directions for delivery of workplace interventions are around less in-person time, augmenting online technology to reduce barriers to access, lower costs, and increase both scale and organisational support, which led me to conduct an empirical study of my own, looking at a brief online intervention that I developed. So the aim of the empirical study was to identify the impact of a brief online self-compassion focused intervention on the health and well-being of healthcare professionals, to understand whether employees' health and well-being can be improved by the intervention, whether those improvements can be maintained over time, and if a time-limited online intervention can be effective. The method I used was a randomised controlled trial with intervention and waitlist groups assessed at 4 separate time points, and the measures I used were the self-compassion scale, the Warwick and Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale, the perceived stress scale, and the Copenhagen burnout inventory. The participants were a volunteer sample of healthcare professionals from 5 NHS trusts around the UK. Here's a flowchart to show the number of participants who completed each phase of the study. We actually had 424 people express interest in taking part, but following formal recruitment and screening, we started with 230. I'll just take you down the intervention group first. So the intervention group received the intervention weekly via email across 4 weeks. So we measured them at baseline, and we then measured them again immediately after the intervention, 4 weeks after they started it. And then we measured them again at 4 weeks again later, so at 1 month follow-up. And then in terms of the control group, the waitlist group, they undertook the outcome measures at T2 immediately after the intervention group completed, again at T3 at the 1 month follow-up for the intervention group. Then they received the intervention in one email, but they were still given 4 weeks to complete that. And then we measured them at their post-intervention. So I'll just outline the actual intervention to you. It's called the Self-Compassion at Work programme. It's brief, self-guided and online. And it has a total of 4 pre-recorded training webinars where people are required to listen to 1 per week. It solely focuses on the 3 core components of self-compassion, both theory and practice. And included in this iteration of the programme that was tested, people were provided with the webinars and the daily reflective diary, a short key task to underpin each of the webinars once a week, and an action plan. Full instructions were provided. It used a very user-friendly interface, and participants were encouraged to apply the learning from the programme to their working lives and all the interactions that took place in the workplace. So what did we find? I'm going to go through the key outcome measures with you. In terms of overall self-compassion, the intervention group, as you can see here in the darker green line, increased across time significantly and increased again in the follow-up period. The waitlist control group cruised along the bottom until they received the intervention and then significantly increased in terms of their overall self-compassion. When we look at mental well-being, the intervention group increased significantly between pre and post-programme and then continued to improve slightly between post-programme and follow-up. The waitlist group, actually their mental well-being decreased whilst the intervention group were completing their programme, but as soon as they received the intervention, their mental well-being significantly improved. In terms of perceived stress, we see quite an interesting pattern, and we saw perceived stress significantly decrease in the intervention group from pre to post, but we did see a slight increase in the follow-up period. And also, if you look at the waitlist control group as well, they also increased slightly in that time. Now, there are a number of possible reasons for this, but some of them I'll just surmise for you. So there may have been a negative response bias due to the fact that the participants were completing identical questionnaires for the third time at time 3. But also, when I looked back at what was happening in the first week of April 2019, which was when T3 was administered, there were well-documented political uncertainties in the UK at that time regarding the ongoing Brexit votes in the House of Commons that week. And also, it could have been in relation to organisational climates, both in individual trusts or in the NHS as a whole. At the time, the NHS was facing many years of austerity, challenging operating environment, and an ever-changing landscape in terms of the overall health and well-being of the healthcare sector. And also towards this period of time was the end of the peak winter period, where there's a notable increased demand in NHS services, which could have also potentially impacted on this slight increase in the follow-up scores. As you can see, as soon as the waitlist control group were provided with the intervention, their scores rapidly decreased to their post-programme follow-up. In terms of personal burnout, we saw significant decreases both at post and follow-up and in the waitlist control group as well. In terms of work burnout, we see that similar slight increase in the follow-up period, as I've already described, from follow-up to, from post-programme to follow-up in the intervention group. But when the waitlist control group were provided with the intervention, their scores came down significantly in terms of work burnout and client-related burnout. These are all components, by the way, the burnout components are components of the Copenhagen burnout inventory. They significantly decreased and continued to decrease in the follow-up period as the same happened in terms of the waitlist control group as well. So what were the key findings in terms of the quantitative results? Well, between the intervention group and the waitlist control group, we saw significant differences at post-intervention and 1 month follow-up. Overall, there was a large effect size, a Cohen's d of 1.46 for the Self-Compassion at Work programme. And in fact, at post-programme for the intervention group, all the outcome measures, including the 6 subscales on the Self-Compassion scale, were significantly affected by the intervention. So the findings supported the hypothesis that a brief online self-compassion development intervention would significantly improve the self-reported health and well-being of subjects from a working population, and the benefits would be maintained at follow-up. We also provided some post-programme evaluations. 92% of participants said they would recommend the programme to a colleague, and they found it acceptable and a feasible intervention for a healthcare professional sample. Just a couple of verbatim quotes. I would definitely recommend this programme. I think this should be offered to everyone as part of an organisation's responsibility for employee welfare and well-being. I think it could be used within team supervision to create a more caring atmosphere in my place of work and should form part of appraisals. And I hope it gets rolled out across the NHS, as it would really benefit working relationships to create more caring work environments and improve people's mental well-being. So in terms of what we can learn as practitioners from this piece of research, that this particular programme, the Self-Compassionate Workshop programme, does show promise as a target intervention in the workplace and could be of interest to organisations looking to reach a large workforce, and that a 4-week online self-guided intervention to develop specifically self-compassion in the workplace may offer a flexible, effective and a cost-saving solution to reducing stress and burnout and improving mental well-being. And for a busy working population with no previous experience of self-compassion, they may find the intervention both accessible and feasible, and would recommend the programme to their colleagues and provide very positive evaluations. So in terms of application, the Self-Compassionate Work programme actually has 2 live versions, the generic version for any organisation, but also a specific version for the public sector. And this forms part of the health and wellbeing strategy in a growing number of large organisations, from both the private sector, in academia, in the not-for-profit sector and third sector and social enterprise, as well as in the public sector, police services, health services, ambulance trust, fire and rescue, local government and social care organisations as well. So it's designed as a low-cost, high-volume programme to increase access. And the way it works is that once an organisation says, yes, we want this programme for 100 people in our organisation, 200 people, whatever, a flyer is provided to advertise the programme to staff with a link to the webpage and a discount code provided, which allows immediate and automated access to the full programme whenever people want to access it. If you're interested in this programme, or either of these 2 programmes, or the Compassionate Leadership Coaching programme that I've also designed and deliver into organisations, please do have a look at the website creatingcompassion.com. There's a list of references for this presentation. I just want to highlight to you that my doctoral thesis is available. And if you were interested in more of the detail of what I've outlined today, you're welcome to go to the academic library and look that up. So in case you were interested in developing this approach for yourself, in 2015, I published a reflective journal. It's based on the 3 core components of self-compassion, and it's basically a weekly reflective guide to support your self-compassion development over the course of a year. And you can get it either through my website, and which links to the publisher, or via Amazon. I share a lot on, as much as I can anyway, on LinkedIn and Twitter in terms of practice articles and research developments. Please feel free to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for listening. And it's a great pleasure to present this for Birkbeck Connections. I hope it was of interest and of use. And thank you again. You're welcome to contact me at my email if you're interested in any further information. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.